Seconds. And now we're live. Welcome, everybody, to the Wizard of Radical Self Respect. My name is Jared Mello. Today we have episode number 25, which is going to be an interview with Terri from Character Out's podcast. Super excited to talk to her about her experience with a narcissistic mother and her whole family upbringing. And then wherever it goes from there, it's going to go. It's going to be wild. I don't know where it's going to go. But how are you today, Terri?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
It's a
The
pleasure.
25th episode. Do I get gold confetti or something?
You know, think about that. I should have had something special lined up
or
for
is
the
that
25.
silver? It's 50 gold.
Either way, I should have done something. There's a landmark number.
Feel like I should have gotten something,
man.
confetti or something.
What a terrible host I am. Sometimes people do confetti, and I've seen that when they put their hand in the air, confetti comes down on their screen. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, no, that's totally a thing because I have a toddler. So it's it just stays and just go. Yeah, it's okay. It's fine.
Hopefully you can forgive me. That terrible blunder of mine. What a bad way to start.
But 25, that's a huge deal. Congratulations.
And then technically, there's even more than that, though, because I didn't number them before. So I was careless. I carelessly didn't number them. And I just started numbering them 25 ago. So tisk. Out of control. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you wound up starting the Character Out's podcast? Because I'm sure it was a wild ride for you to get to where you are.
Yeah. Let's see. In a quick little nutshell, I won the toxic family jackpot. So my dad was an absentee dad. My parents got divorced when I was 5. My mom has BPD and is a covert narcissist. My brother's the golden child. My stepmom is an enabling alcoholic. So yeah, it's been fun. How I started the Character Out's podcast. So I'm sure we'll get into the details of my family and my narcissistic mother and the discard and all that fun stuff. But basically, when I was at rock bottom, when I really realized that I could not have a relationship with my family in its entirety, I looked around, and anyone that I would tell, aside from, my best friends and my closest people in my life, anyone that I would tell was like, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean you had a fight with your mom? You need to fix it. What do you mean you don't talk to your dad? You need to fix it. And I was like, what? Do you even know what you're saying? And the societal norms were really, they vilified anyone who put a stop to emotional abuse just because it's family. And I couldn't wrap my head around that. And so I was going to write a book, but my daughter started a podcast, and she's 23. And so everything fabulous, I copy her, obviously. So I'm like, I want to start a podcast too. So I started a podcast, and the main goal is I am on a mission to normalize going and staying no contact with toxic family. And I want to make people feel like it's okay. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to preserve your peace, to preserve the peace of your children. It's okay to say no to toxicity. And no matter what it is, I think so many times as victims, we can compare our suffering. And, I was like, well, I was never, beaten up, and I was never sexually abused. So I didn't have it that bad. Yeah, I did. If you're still carrying trauma from your family, you had it bad. Okay.
Right.
So yeah.
At what point did you realize something was a little off in your family in that regard?
It's interesting. I think my family was kind of like whack-a-mole. I realized each member played a different role and was a different level of toxicity at a different time. It really came to a head when I went through my divorce with my first husband. And my whole life, I thought my mother was my best friend. She's a covert narcissist. I had heard the term narcissism, but she never fit the bill. To be honest, she was my best friend. I was well taken care of. She, bought me clothes. I never went without. Like I said, we were best friends. I'd want to skip school and go to the beach with her. And I told her everything. The only thing is, when I would step out of line, and the only way I knew how to describe it, because I didn't have the jargon associated with narcissistic abuse. I mean, it was the 80s. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, was that she would take her love away from me. And I would feel abandoned. So between my father leaving when I was 5, it made this very unhealthy bond with my mother. And then she would leave me too, and she would take her love away from me. And I remember a therapist explaining this to me and saying, your coping mechanism was you wrote on the walls of your heart what to do to keep your mother in your life and what not to do to push her away. So from very early on, I just remember I didn't want to lose her love. So whatever I needed to do to keep my mother's love and to keep her love, like even now I'm like, trauma response, but I would do whatever I needed to do, whether it was sacrifice something I wanted to do, become who she wanted me to be, hate someone she hated. I just remember, times where I would stand at her bed crying and she just would sit there stoic and not talk to me. And that was normal. It was normal until I realized it wasn't really normal.
So basically, if you disagreed with her or didn't go along with her in whatever she was thinking or doing, then that was grounds for punishment. And the punishment is withholding of love.
Yeah.
And in narcissistic families, a lot of times, earning love is the norm.
Right.
And this is an interesting dynamic. I'm glad you mentioned it the way you did, because often people don't think about it as like the friend too. Like they don't think about, you had like a best friend dynamic with her. So how did that kind of develop as it was?
Interestingly, I think for me, what my narcissistic mother would do is develop the friendship in a very unhealthy way. So there was lots of isolation. There was lots of, she was the first mean girl in my life. So she hated all of my friends. She really had no friends. We hated everyone, but we hated everyone together and we had each other.
Wow.
Isn't that healthy? So really this aspect of codependence was created at a very young age. And when you're little, you don't know, you just think, especially if you're a child who's continually discarded, you just think, oh, well, who cares who we hate? Like, I'm on mom's good side now. Like, I don't care. Like, I just don't want to be on the other side. I don't want to be on that side of the discard, except I didn't know that. I didn't know that terminology, but so, the love bombing was so, that's why they call it love bombing, I believe, because it lasts. It has aftershocks. It has impacts. And long after the love bomb is dropped, you feel like especially when you've been discarded and then you're love bombed back, it's like the dust is still settling and you hear ringing in your ears and you're just like, whoa, like all you want to do is get back to your mom. And you don't realize that you're in this sick and insidious abusive cycle. You just modify your life without even realizing. You make sacrifices and compromises and you don't even realize. And I didn't realize until I became an adult in my 30s. And I realized the dynamic, and because it becomes so ingrained, you knee-jerk will modify your life because you don't want to lose your mom. And the fear of losing your mom is overwhelming.
Because you attach, right? Everyone attaches to their caregivers, whether they're toxic, borderline, a narcissist, a psychopath, it doesn't matter. People try to attach to who their primary caregivers are. And the dynamic you were mentioning, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me a lot of a cult's dynamic where it's an us versus them mentality. You mentioned
Yeah.
They say there's a quote that says nothing brings people closer together than the hatred of a third person or a third group. And that's kind of the strategy a cult uses. And a
Yeah.
narcissistic family, very similar to a cult, where, oh, we hate these people together. And you feel closer together, though,
Right.
when you hate them together like that.
Right. That literally gives me chills. And my therapist said to me too, when I went to her, and I was just like I remember I was literally in my 30s going through my divorce, and I was like, I don't want to go on vacation with my mom. And and she's like, why are you so afraid of your mom? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I was hardwired to fear her and to obey her. And she equated it to coming out of a cult. It's exactly how she equated it to.
There
Just
you go.
you're just immersed in the ideology of it. That was a wonderful, wonderful example.
And that's why they say you're both subscribed to a distorted version of reality in that case.
Yes.
You were subscribed to her reality, and
Right.
she's subscribed to some other version of reality as well. That is, who knows where it is, but probably just about power, control, or image, something along those lines. Narcissistic supply.
Right.
But I think another aspect of that part is the silent treatments is what she was doing to you. Was that her primary weapon of choice?
Yeah.
Silent treatments?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Listen, that's the other element, is that, the narcissistic mother, the narcissistic father, they know you better than you probably know yourself at that age. They know you. They're your parent. And so you think, because they know you, when they drop these horrible comments, when they discard you, or when they treat you in such a way, you think it's normal. You think, well, of course they love me. Like, of course they do. They're my parent. You wouldn't even think that anything is wrong.
Right. And that's where the impaired empathy part, I think, comes in too, from them, where they're able just to punish, like, mercilessly their children, when they should be the person that has their children's best interest, is going to try to really be like a guide and mentor, love them through. Don't coddle too much, but don't neglect the happy medium thing.
Right.
That's just like not even on their radar. It's more just, it's all about them. It's all about them and what they want and whatever their version of supply is.
Correct.
What was her version of supply?
That's a great question, because in my opinion, she was not the typical narcissist. She was very self-deprecating, very insecure. I think her supply, it's a great question, was probably the control. And I believe, sadly enough, that it stems from her trauma. She came from a boatload of trauma, like horrible things happened to her. So I think that she did, whether it started off well-intentioned or not, and manifested into this, maleficent monster, I don't know. And it doesn't matter. Intent doesn't matter. The abuse happened. And when I brought it to her attention, it didn't matter then either. But I believe that it stemmed from trauma, and it turned into control. And I think that, sadly enough, she wouldn't let me go out. She wouldn't let me, she was always afraid I was going to get raped or murdered or mugged or whatever. And, looking back, like, that's really not a horrible, intention for your daughter. I mean, she protected me, so it's like, but it really comes out. And I believe it came out when I was when I was an adult in my 30s, and I stepped out of this life and this image that she thought that I was, because I had kept it up for so long. And so I all of a sudden was doing things that she didn't approve of. And that's when, things just fell off the rails. Now, was she afraid for me and didn't have the coping skills? Because I don't know. I don't know.
Right.
But it's sad. Like, I feel sad for her, because she can't get out of her own way. And it's sad. All I wanted to do was love her, but it's too much. She's too
Right.
abusive and too toxic, and
Right.
would destroy my life and my relationship with my children, destroy it. So,
And that's like the dark cloud. And I think that happens to some people who have borderline too. You said she's comorbid. I think that's worth noting as well, because a lot of the BPD people in particular, they can have that kind of dark cloud.
yeah.
And for certain people, they get kind of addicted to that dark cloud. And some of them
Agree.
have
Yeah.
these problems, right? And there's so many problems to solve for a lot of them, that a
Yeah.
person who's a little more codependent, who wants to be a helper, who wants to get their sense of self-worth from feeling needed by others and helping, that's a bad recipe for someone like that, because that
Right.
BPD person is going to have all sorts of issues and problems for that other person to try to work on. The
Yeah.
key, though, is this: the codependent person has to see why they're really doing what they're doing. And a lot of times it's so that they don't have to look at their own problems. They can try to
Yes.
solve the other person's problems.
Oh, always.
When they're doing that, they're not working on their own problems. The
Oh,
other thing,
always. I mean,
and
I'll never forget when my mother was diagnosed with BPD. She called me, and we had some intermittent. I had already moved to New York, and we had our major no contact moment when she kicked me and my 3 kids out of the house. That was like a major moment. And then we had kind of had some times of reconciliation, and then she discarded me again, and reconciliation and discard again, and you know how it goes. And she called me and she was like, oh, I just got off the phone with my therapist, and I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And I was like, wow, okay, Mom. Naturally I put her on speaker and started Googling borderline personality disorder, because again, I had no idea. And then she goes, and I think you have it too. And listen,
she couldn't help herself.
I'm like, okay, maybe I do. So I'm like looking, I'm like, no. I'm like, Mom, I don't really feel like I do. And she's like, I can't believe you're handling this conversation so well. And I'm thinking, yeah, bitch, because like I've been in therapy. Like, I know, you know what I mean? I can like handle you, but I was like, oh God.
The other thing I want to highlight that you said that I think is so, so important, you said intent doesn't matter with some of this stuff. It doesn't matter what the intent was,
No.
where it came from, the trauma it came from, or what their label is for that matter either, borderline, covert narcissist.
Right.
None of that matters. What
Yeah.
matters is, what is the end result?
Right.
What do you have to do to be the happiest and healthiest version of yourself? Practice radical self-respect, as I would call it. But that doesn't change. It doesn't change depending on someone's label or intent, etc. Now, the only caveat I'll say about intent is this: usually, if someone has good intent, their actions better at least follow through with good intent. Because if you say you have good intent, but then your actions are not following that, then it's just as bad as having bad intent if the actions aren't there.
Right. And I mean, and typically on the same note, if you have good intentions and someone comes to you and says, wow, that really hurt me, you're not going to do the manipulation, which is, flip it and talk about your reaction as opposed to my responsibility for what I did to you. You're just going to be like, oh my God, I did. I'm sorry. That wasn't my intention. So you can say that wasn't my intention. But what comes with that? Pivoting, changing, embracing, listening to what the other person has to say. But that never happened.
So you had all of this in your childhood. Did you have narcissistic partners too as you began to date?
So funny. The guy that I dated so I was married for 16 years.
Oh, wow.
He's the father of 3 of my children. I don't think that he was a narcissist. I think he has some toxic tendencies, and I don't think that he's a great person. God forgive me. But I don't think he's a narcissist. But oddly enough, my mother, when I started dating after my divorce, and I started dating this guy, and she hated him. And she actually bribed me with my own inheritance that my brother and my mother cut me out of. P.S. She was like, oh, I'll pay you $10,000 if you break up with him. I'm like,
oh my God.
I can't be bought, but thanks.
Oh my Lord.
And he is actually the reason that she kicked us out of the house. And he, like, thank God for him, because we would have been in a homeless shelter. But when the rubber met the road, he was a narcissist. And so, yeah, he actually opened my eyes to the fact that my mother is a narcissist. Yeah,
so they would clash, I bet. Did they clash?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You have no idea.
And would he call her out on
that they
things?
met. Sorry?
And would he call her out on things? Is that kind of okay?
He saw right through her immediately, and that's why she hated him. So it was like, but he was more a malignant, grandiose narcissist, and she being the covert was just all like,
well, I get it. So they don't get along very well. When the narcissists collide together, they know each other's tricks because I think they can sense it. They sense what's going on.
And that was so annoying, right? Because she was like, I hate him. I hate him. And so I was doing everything I could do to prove her wrong. And I swear to God, then she kicked us out. And so I'm like, great. Now I'm committed to this guy. Now I like really want to just prove her wrong. You know what I mean? It was so annoying. I'm like, oh.
Now, in that kind of relationship, though, he's a malignant narcissist. And how long were you with him for?
About 2.5 years. Back and forth, discard, back and forth, discard. I had such a trauma bond to him, though. It was like, you know, it was deep.
And that's like, and your initial trauma bond is with your mother. So you she sowed the seeds for you, tilled the fields for you to develop that kind of attachment, more than likely, with someone exactly like him. Now, do you think that was more of a conscious thing at the time, or did it feel safe to you, or just normal, or?
You know, that's a great question. So growing up, my mother always would say to me, oh, you have daddy issues. You have daddy issues. Your daddy isn't around. You have daddy issues. I'm like, do I though? I'm like, I don't feel like I do. I honestly believe it was 100% a coincidence, because I was dating this guy. I had just gotten divorced. Like, it was just going to be fun. He was fun. I was married for 16 years in a very flatline marriage. You know, I was having fun. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I literally was having fun. And that drove her crazy. Like, one night I was in the shower. She was like, where are you going? And I didn't feel like telling her. P.S. I was like 38 years old. So while I was in the shower, she checked my phone.
Oh, man.
Found out I was going out with him. We weren't doing anything crazy. My kids were with their dad. I wasn't being irresponsible. I wasn't like coming home high and drunk. Like, ugh. And she checked my phone and confronted me after the shower. And she was just like, I can't believe this. You lied to me. P.S. Again, 30, in my 30s. And she chased me. I grabbed my stuff. She chased me out of the door and chased me down the street as I was driving, calling me a whore. So I really feel like it was just, I don't feel like anything's an accident. I love the word serendipity. And I do feel like this guy was in my life to take me out of that situation. But I think he was just supposed to be fun. I'm like, I'm not invested, but then I was invested, because when she kicked me and my 3 kids out, and he was like, yeah, you can move in. Well, now I'm committed. You know what I mean?
And I think that's a good point, though, to make. Sometimes it is just fun in the beginning. It's not always about like a trauma bond and all that. Sometimes a narcissistic person is just fun. And you have fun with that person. And then one thing leads to another. And then before you know it, then maybe the frog in the boiling pot thing could become a thing later. But that's not what it was in the beginning always. Like,
no, but what kept me with him was that he would use me cutting off my family. Even though he saw the toxicity from the front row, he would try to keep me by saying, oh, well, you know, you're just cutting me off like you cut your family off. You know,
weaponizing. Guilt trip weaponizing.
It worked for a while until I started educating myself. But I was like,
that's their favorite thing. Narcissists love, especially if you're going to do something good for yourself or set a boundary or not tolerate disrespect, to make it seem like there's a problem with you. We're doing that in some way, in one way or another. In his case, he used that. But it's the same thing when they call you sensitive for having a boundary and not liking something, or words only have power over you if you let them. Like, they'll twist and distort truths and
Yep.
things that has a kernel of truth, but it's not
Yeah.
the point. It's like the
Classic.
point is, if you want to do something good for you, you should be able to do something good for you. And
Yeah.
who cares what they think about it at that point? Like, you
Yeah.
know what you got to do for you.
Right. Right. But it's hard when it's just especially hard when you have an oppressive, manipulative, controlling mother or father. It is so hard to digest that your actual parent does not have your best intentions at heart.
Right.
It is so hard to digest. And, like you were saying about the relationships and, the trauma bonds to the relationships and the similarities in the relationships, like it's hard to see because you're in it.
Was privacy a thing for you growing up, or was that non-existent?
I want to say she respected my privacy. It's funny though, because you know how you look back with wide eyes to a situation, and she would always say, "Oh, I would never read your diary. Oh, I would never this. I would never that." And it just, you're indoctrinated by the narcissist when you're
Right.
growing up, and it made me wonder. I'm like, I bet you did, because you checked my phone in my 30s, behind my back. Like, I bet you told me that so I would believe it and trust you, but I bet you did.
That
So,
sounds more like it. That
yeah.
sounds more, because who goes out of their way to say, "Oh, I would never read your diary"? It's
Right?
like that's a little wild. That's a little wild.
Yeah.
And so throughout this dynamic, though, she had a smothering thing. It sounds like though too, where she would, and that's more of a borderline part too, where they'll catastrophize the world, where she
Oh,
was
yeah.
scared that all of these things would happen to you. And this is kind of like an archetypal story of the Oedipal mother, where they don't want you to go out there in the world
Right.
because it would also make you leave them.
Correct.
So they want to scare you to keep you with her.
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was afraid to leave her. I didn't go away to college because I was like, how can I leave my mom? Even when I married my husband and we lived in Texas for a season, the only thing I was focused on is getting back home to my mom. How could I be away from her? How could I have kids away from her? I have to be with my mom. When my mom came, she was above everybody.
And that's the programming she gave you. She gave you this programming of putting her needs before your own. That's ultimately what it is.
Yeah. And that's why it came crashing down in adulthood when I would try to set a boundary, and then she'd discard me. And then I would try to have a healthy conversation and she'd discard me. And I finally was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. And it started impacting my children. And then one of the discards was, she actually was conspiring with my ex-husband to hire an attorney to take my kids away from me when I wanted to move to New York and get married and start my life over again. And she had told a friend, and the friend told me, and called her, and she didn't deny it. And I'm like, I don't know how we're going to get past this, but invited her to the wedding.
And that's the blurred, the weaker boundaries part, right? And they don't do you any favors with this, where it sounds like what you had was a very enmeshed relationship where you're together, but privacy part, that part surprises me. But the enmeshment, though, that sounds like a lot like what it was. We were just one fused unit.
And everybody would say that. Oh my gosh, you guys are best friends. Oh, you guys share a brain. Oh my gosh, you and your mom. Or my friends would be like, oh my God, I wish I had a mom. I wish I was as close with my mom as you. And I was walking around thinking I was the luckiest girl in the world. Like, oh, my mom's my best friend.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly what she wants you to think too.
Right.
Now, do you think her voice, the way she spoke to you, has become your internal voice as an adult, or did it to a certain point?
I can tell you that her internal voice, I began to silence it when I had kids.
Okay.
And that was the moment I was like, oh, I don't want to be anything like her. And I was still in contact with my oldest is 23. I've only been no contact with my mom for about 4 years. So I realized what was going through my head as I was raising my children and what would almost come out of my mouth. And I literally would raise them saying, what would my mom do? I would conspire and think of what the 180 version would be. And then that's what I would execute.
That's smart. And it's very helpful to do that. And it worked well, it sounds like.
Yes. But it's scary because I feel like when I got to my 20s was when I kind of saw like things might not be really as normal as I thought that they were. When I got married for the first time, and I could sense like, oh, things aren't really normal, but I didn't want to face it. And so I started to pull away a little bit. And so then when my daughter turned 20, I was like, oh my gosh, like I got scared, like, oh my God, am I gonna all of a sudden turn into my mother? Is our dynamic gonna shift and is gonna switch? So, it's scary. I mean, when you have this kind of mother, and then you become a mom, you just don't want to be anything like her. You just like,
I can't even imagine it, right? Because when you look back at how she treated you, you probably couldn't imagine treating your kids
oh my
that
God.
way and doing those things. And for some people, the more they look back at it, the more terrible it seems what their parents did.
Yeah.
But which reminds me, do you remember the moment when you decided to cut them off, or what the thought process is when you finally said, like, yeah, no, like that's it.
Yeah.
Like I gotta leave them and for my own peace.
Yeah. I always say going no contact is never a poof or a one fight or a one-time thing. The decision and the choice to go no contact was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. And it was a culmination of little withdrawals and little withdrawals. And it was just this culminating event. And I'll never forget, she was standing in my kitchen, and she'd been at my house for like 6 weeks, and it was during COVID. And before that, she began to rewrite history and meddle into the relationship with my daughter and I. But my daughter is too smart for that, and we're too close. So she began to call it out. She began to pull me into conversations with my mother and call out some toxic things. And I watched my mother just crumble and rewrite history and get very defensive. And my daughter was like, what is happening? And my husband was like, because he comes from a healthy family. He had no idea. And so he's watching this unfold. He's like, what is happening? Like, how can you rewrite history like this? This is literal crazy making. So I had already seen, and when she kicked us out of the house, she had one of my sons in a headlock, telling him not to go with mommy because I was bad. And she looked at my daughter, who was 12 at the time, and said, your mother doesn't love or respect you. So fast forward, my daughter was 19, 18 at the time. And there's my mother. All my kids were home, kind of scattered around the house. But there's my mother. I had gone to her and said, you've been here for 6 weeks. I think it's time we talk about, when you go home. I didn't tell her to leave. I didn't tell her I was going to cut her off. Nothing. She went just off the rails immediately. I want to go home anyway. She texted me. I'm like, why don't you come upstairs? Like, why are you texting me? We're in the same house. Like, come upstairs and have a conversation. Packed her bags, like all mad. I'm leaving. And I was like, okay, like, all right. My friend is picking me up. I said, okay, I can't wait to see her, family friend. She doesn't want to see you. She's disgusted with you. All right. And at that point, like, I'd been kicked so many times by her, and I had been so educated on the cycle of the narcissist, and I now had the narcissistic jargon in my belt, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the triangulation, the flipping, the crazy making. I knew it. And I was watching her stand there in my kitchen, and she's just gaslighting me and twisting things. And I'm looking at her, and I was like, oh my God, it's never been me. I always thought it was me. It's never been me. It's always been you. And at that moment, I felt this release. I was like, oh, it's not my job to fix it. And even if it was, I'm never going to fix this. And she had, at that point, had walked in and out of our lives, walked in and out of my children's lives too many times to count. I remember looking at her thinking, and I said to her, I was like, you're gaslighting me. And the words, and then she started insulting me again. I'm like, it's not working. And I said to her, I said, Mom, don't leave. Let's open a bottle of wine. Let's break this toxic generational cycle right now. You always leave. Don't leave. And she left. And I even walked her to the door. My kids put her suitcase in the car. The friend who thought I was disgusting hated me. And we waved to her. And I said, if you ever were here, if you want to come back, like, if you change your mind. She left.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even a conscious thing. I was released. I got a migraine a couple hours later. And then I woke up the next day and I said to my husband, I was like, that's never happening again. And I didn't call her and I wasn't like, hey, like it's me. I'm never talking to you again.
Right,
like,
right.
no. But she didn't reach out to me either. And she's dripped a little bit here and there.
Right.
But it was just like this. No contact is like, it's this freedom. It's this release. It shouldn't be full of bitterness. I felt sorry for her. Like, you poor woman, you can't get out of your way. You're going to miss out on all this love, but it's not my responsibility anymore.
Right.
Let it go.
And I think that's a much better way to look at it too than being resentful.
Because, you have to.
Right?
You have to.
And it helps. And just to know also that she wasn't going to change. They can't help themselves.
Yes.
But to do that drama thing and have everything be adversarial, flip the script. If that's just who they are as a person, that's their temperament.
Right.
They can't change that temperament a lot of times. And they don't even try either, for that matter.
Right.
And you tried, though. You tried
to
extend the olive branch.
And
she just wasn't for it. And it's all on her terms.
She couldn't. And that's what I think that, really I had to embrace. She can't. I'm asking her to do something that she can't do. And that also takes kind of the grief and the abandonment and the insult of it all. Like, how can my mom not love me, especially being a mom? Like, if my daughter told me to stand on one leg and eat shrimps to turn pink and become a flamingo, I would do it. You know what I mean? But like, she can't do that. And one of my favorite books is by what's the first name? It's up there. Wallen is the last name. It's It Didn't Start With You. And I'll never forget stumbling upon the chapter that, have you ever heard of it?
No, I don't think I have heard of that one.
It's so good. I came to the chapter of embracing your toxic parent, embracing your narcissistic parent, and getting to know them. And I remember I closed it and I put it out. I'm like, nope. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. You know why? Because when you humanize them as empaths, you're like, my fear was I'm going to humanize her and then I'm going to call her again because I'm going to feel bad for her and I'm going to need her in my life again. But this book, it was so challenging to read through every single word, but it was actually very healing to be like, no, like, you poor baby, you had so much trauma. You can't even change these toxic outbursts and then your manipulative ways. And I can feel sorry for you, but you're going to stay over here.
Right.
Because you hurt and you hurt my kids and no more. I don't care if you're my mom, like, no more.
Now, was it easier for you to protect your kids from your mother than it was to protect yourself?
That's a great question. No, no, because my mother would always badmouth my father. And my mother would always badmouth my grandparents. And I never wanted my children to, you're just like the cult mentality. I was always in the cult mentality of the hate. We all hate. And I never wanted my kids to dislike their grandmother because I disliked them.
Right.
I wanted, hey, when they became adults, I'm like, you have your grandmother's number. If you want to reach out, go for it. I wanted their perception of their grandmother to be their perception. And I needed to be at peace with, if they want to have a relationship, they can have a relationship with her. They all have chosen not to because they've seen the hurt themselves. They're not hating her by proxy. And I think that's the healthiest way, because that'll bite you if you are just like, if I'm telling my stories And then they, I'm not breaking the cycle then they feel obligated to me and protect me and hate their parent. Like, that's not how
Now you played that well. You did that well, I think. And even your daughter, she sounds like she has a good head on her shoulders too. Where she was able to say that to your mom, where I don't know how old she is, but that's pretty impressive for someone at her age to be able to do that. I think there are kids, especially if they had good parents, they are way more advanced in some ways, I find, than I feel like I was at their age. I'm blown away at some of the emotional maturity some of these kids have.
I agree. I feel like they're so much farther ahead than we were. And they're allowed to speak their minds, speak what they want. As I've been raising my kids, I've just been, I'm not a perfect mom. I'm an evolving mom. I try, but I make mistakes. And so I always go to them and I'm like, I am sorry. I mean, the amount of times that I've said I'm sorry or tell me your perspective. And that was never done for me. I was always told what to think. I was told how to behave. I was told what I should do, what I should wear. And I never wanted to do that.
And sometimes just the little things like that just weren't ever said. Oh, what do you think about this?
Right.
What would you like to do?
No.
Those little things were just never asked. They have these ideals for their kids in mind that that's it. This is how it is. This is what I want you to do. Never mind asking you if you even want to do this, but we're just going to tell you this is what you should do.
Right. Like the unsolicited advice of even, young adult children just blows my mind. I'm like,
And she's tried to hoover you a couple times since this no contact or come back around a little bit. How did that look?
One time it was in the form of an email where she sent me a picture of her sitting across the table with an empty chair. And the caption was, "This is bullshit."
What a guilt tripper.
And then, so I actually, I'm sure you're familiar with the Parkland shooting at Douglas High School. That's my alma mater. My daughter went to Douglas. So that hit very, very close to home. So she actually called me, I think the day after the shooting. And we actually reconciled for a season. Yeah. But a lot of the past, she called me recently, right before Thanksgiving. And it was just it was very strange. It made me wonder if perhaps she'd found out about the podcast or
maybe
something. I don't know. It was and I was so scared to listen to her message, but like you said, they give us good content, right? So I did a whole episode on it.
There's certainly opportunities in there. That's for sure. And I think that's the other one I wanted to ask you. So when you read that book, how far along into the no contact at that point were you?
Very early on.
That's dangerous time to read it then, maybe, because like if someone's in a romantic relationship, they're not always ready to hear the really understand the other person's side part because they're still too close. And you are at risk of trying to find reasons to take them back. They're fighting to not do that. And if they read something like that, maybe they're more tempted to say, oh, okay, I understand. I can work with this now. Now that I know, I can work with it. And I think that's more at risk of happening in a romantic relationship probably than in a mother-daughter relationship. But it's just something to pay attention to, I think, where if you're not in a good, stable spot with what you're thinking about them, or you're still in the trauma bond with a romantic partner, I'd be careful. I'll be careful of like when I read certain things, etc. But I do think there would always be a time where that would be a great thing for them to read at some point.
Because I love that you said that, because I'll say on my podcast all the time, listen, I'm just a survivor who survived the hard knocks of a toxic family and a narcissistic mother, but I have a degree in elementary education. Like that did not help me navigate my narcissistic mother. But I love that you said that, because I'm just here telling you what worked for me. And there were times that I stuffed things, and that's okay. Like you don't have to, like one thing at a time. Like you don't have to be strong. You don't have to have everything figured out right out of the gate. just one breath, one step, one moment at a time. Just keep your peace. And I love that you just gave your audience permission to just table it for a little while. Like, it's okay. You've been through a lot. You know what I mean? I love that you said that.
And because I see this, and you probably see this too in your comment sections, where people will kind of weaponize something that is technically true. Well,
Right.
they'll say, "Oh yeah, you weren't perfect either,"
Oh,
but
oh,
they'll say something like that, which technically is true,
yeah.
but it's in no way helpful
Right.
or validating in any way for
Yeah.
someone who's in the midst of it, maybe still in a traumatic relationship or just
Yeah.
exiting. That's not the time to tell someone like that.
No.
That it doesn't help them at all. Like, there's stages to the healing, and
100%.
there's seasons. There's seasons to the healing.
Yes, yes. And I'm so happy that you said that, because the bottom line is, like, I was broken. I didn't want to learn about narcissism. The only thing I wanted to learn was, how do I feel better? That's the only thing I was focusing on. How do I keep my little family together and feel better? Like one thing at a time. And then, you get to a season of you're a little stronger, and then you can start embracing more difficult topics that can propel you along a little bit. But yeah, it's just, I again love that you said that.
Yeah, of course. And I think as you did what you did with your podcast, was it like peeling away more layers of the onion there, where you learn more and more, and maybe you didn't know everything at first, but then there's another layer, and then there's another layer. Has it been that way for you?
Oh, 100%. I feel like I'm still learning, still learning. And I say to my audience all the time, like, I am in the trenches with you.
Yeah, it never ends. It never ends.
And
I think that's important. That's important to say.
Yeah. And I feel like, I always say that this no contact, it's a journey. Like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, man, like, look at me, I'm so strong. And then, my birthday, for example, came and went. And I got sad because no one in my toxic family called. But that sounds stupid, right? Like, that sounds like preposterous.
Right.
So on one hand, I'm like, yay, they respect my boundaries. And on the other hand, I'm like, wow, like, I'm really invisible. Like, they really don't care, So it's the conundrum and these clashing of emotions that I found no one was really talking about. So, like, they're all okay. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay.
And that's where I think even the mother-daughter thing is unique, because like there's expressions like, oh, a mother, if they have a daughter, that's a best friend for life kind of thing. And it's a little different with a son, right? Now, there may be a narcissistic mother who tries to do something similar with their son, but you do see more of the longer relationships where daughters will stay closer to their mothers, generally speaking.
Yes.
Than sons will, right? And I'm sure that adds other layers of complexity, or it did at some point, most likely.
For sure. And in my family, the boys were always the golden child and the girls were hated.
And I was talking about that with a friend of mine today too, where something about a lot of mothers have that towards their sons, where they want to really like protect them and save them and like coddle them to a point. But with the daughters, they want them to be more like the strong, independent woman, like to take care of things. Although it doesn't seem like your mother was like that for you, but it does seem like with other mothers, it's that way. But before you go on, I want to read this too. Helen York says, I noticed my mother was loving her so, I thought, until I turned 13 and I started getting friends going out, and then she hated me for living a life. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
The pity party. The guilt trip pity party.
Yeah. And you can't have a life without her.
No, because then you're abandoning her. And that reminds me, do you think the borderline aspect of your mother, do you think that played a unique part in the role?
That's an interesting question. It's a little
different. It's a little different than narcissism, but they're similar but different.
Yeah. I really can't speak on that confidently. I really don't know. That's a great question. One that I'll for sure write down and dig into, because it's an interesting thought.
Because what I would say with the borderline mothers, I listened to a very interesting audiobook by Christine Ann Lawson, And it's not, I would say, DSM approved, but there's 4 versions of narcissistic mothers, where there's the witch, the hermit, the waif, and the queen. And she goes and she breaks all of them down. But a lot of what happens with the borderline mother is there's some parentification, where the mother treats you like an adult, not like a parent-daughter relationship, mother-daughter relationship, but more like, no, you're an adult with her.
Right.
The
I got
blurs
that.
get blurred. And that's a borderline thing to do. They do that parentification and enmeshment part, and they'll try to sometimes scare you about the outside world to keep you closer to them. And I see borderline mothers do that with their sons too. They don't want their sons to leave them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, here's another question. Maddie says, loving this podcast, so different to my situation, yet so similar. I would like to know if Terri is on YouTube. We are working on that, Maddie. Well done, Terri. This is great. Proud of us all for changing generational abuse. Thanks, Maddie.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we will help you get on YouTube too. That would be a good thing. But I interrupted you before. Do you remember what you were going to say?
Something about the NPD trauma.
Well, about the borderline part and the
can't recall.
Oh well, it'll come back around when you least expect it. So, what have been the challenges since then? Since you've done this no contact, has there been new challenges that come up, or where is the journey taking you?
That's a great question. I think as when you have a narcissistic mother or father or a toxic family, the struggle is always internal. So it's rewiring my brain. It's accepting love. For me, I had a lot of problems in my marriage at the beginning. We've been married for 7 years now, but my MO was flight or fight. Like I was out, so we would have a fight and I'm like, that's it. I'm divorcing you. I'm out. I'm gone, or we would get into a fight and I wouldn't talk to him. And it's horrible because that's what was done to me. And I knew it was the most hurtful thing that anyone could have ever done to me. And my husband, coming from a healthy family, I wouldn't talk to him for days as his punishment. And I didn't even really connect that I was doing that. I was just doing what was done to me and it felt normal until he finally was like, I really wish you would stop doing that. Like it hurts. And when he said that to me, I was like,
That was pretty cool of him to be able to address it like that, though, too, because it sounded like he did it in a disarming way, too. It wasn't like, what are you doing? It's like, oh, it's actually just not kind of cool when you do that.
And that's what I love about him is that, we typically have this fear of abandonment, and this insecure, like, because everybody's left, our own mother who was supposed to love us unconditionally had conditions. So, you can get insecure and it's like, well, I didn't do that. Or I got mad. Like, you still love me? Are you mad at me? Are you gonna leave?
I get you.
So it's like the internal struggle of like working through. And then I think another struggle is breaking the toxic generational cycles with my kids and wanting to respond so badly like my toxic mother did, especially the older they get. My kids are 23, 20, 19, 16, and 5. So it's like, I'm in the trenches, and like, just recently something with my 16-year-old and it's like, don't respond like my mother, because we want to do what was done to us. And it seems so normal. So I think this no contact journey, I don't know why I didn't. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I think everything happens for a reason and the timing is perfect. But when you go no contact with your family, with your mom, the battle used to be exterior and it becomes interior. It becomes about an internal battle where you are sometimes questioning yourself, you're doubting yourself. Then you replay things that your mother said to you. You're a whore, you're a loser, you're a bad mom, you'll never amount to anything. It's grabbing hold of all of those thoughts and being strong when you're so broken, rebuilding yourself and juggling all of those things while, society is like, It's your mom.
The well-intended but misguided suggestions, they call it.
Yes. Yes.
And you touched on another issue there that I've spoken on before, but narcissistic fleas, where people find themselves acting in similar ways
Yes.
to their caregivers that were narcissistic. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you were doing a little bit of some silent treatments, but you were able to admit it and acknowledge it when confronted. And I think that's the big distinction between someone that has a defect or a shortcoming, because no one's perfect,
Right.
versus the truly character disordered or personality disordered person. When they're presented with that very real information, they enrage, or they'll do another silent treatment, or they'll do something.
Blame
But
it on you.
anything, right? Flip all the tactics that they'll do. But you were able to receive it and say, oh, wow, like, you're right. This is something I do. And how were you able to process that part of it? Because you're certainly not alone with that. Maybe people don't talk about it, but that's a common thing, I think.
Yeah. I think my husband and I had gotten to a place of trust. And I knew he wasn't going to leave. I knew I could be vulnerable. I knew I could be my authentic self with him. I think it's that trust in a relationship. Because I can tell you right now, I did it to my ex-husband.
Okay.
And I didn't care. I was a terrible wife. I literally was so bad, and I didn't care. So, he didn't match my energy either. So that's an element too. But, I feel like when you feel safe and you're in a good relationship, whatever it is, for me, I never saw anyone bend to me. I never saw anyone in my family care about what I was feeling. So to see someone care about how I'm feeling, long before that one fight, where not one, it was several times that I discarded him. I just ghosted him and gave him the silent treatment. But, we had built this dynamic. And the other important thing, and I have a whole episode on it, is we've got baggage. And I feel like our partners need to be aware that we got some shit. We got some stuff in our backpack that we sometimes don't want to let go,
Right.
And so navigating that, sometimes he would look at me and be like, I don't understand why you think that. I don't know. Why would you think? I'm like, hi, I come from a toxic family. You come from a healthy family. I'm so happy you can't wrap your head around it, So it's like that. I feel like it's so difficult for us who have been discarded and been in such a toxic relationship. Sometimes you just want to hermit and just, I don't trust anyone. And I feel like some people can do that. Some people can be like, well, I don't trust anyone and I don't want to have anyone in my life. And to me, I feel like, that makes me sad, because I don't want, the toxic parent has taken so much away already. That's don't let them win, overcome. It's okay to trust. Not everyone is bad, kind of thing.
And that's just the important part about when you go no contact, it allows you to live in peace today, where they're not going to be able to rob you of peace because they're not there. And the other thing you had me thinking about too, I think sometimes lost in all the talk that we do about narcissism, etc., is no one is perfect. People do have defects, and there's nuance to this stuff where people are going to mess up a little bit. Everyone has their baggage to an extent, and knowing, okay, just because someone does one thing that would maybe be something a narcissistic person would also do, doesn't mean you got to start doing all the stuff that I would say to do. Like, oh, I got to gray rock them, don't jade, get out of there. It's not that black and white.
Yes.
Where I think sometimes that might get lost on people. And I'm glad you said it that way, because I do want to start trying to focus more on the middle. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. What about the healthy relationships? Yes, you should certainly learn about narcissism and borderline and all of that, toxic behaviors.
Yeah.
But what about, how do you navigate a healthy relationship? How do you make that work? And I guess that's a good question for you. What are the ingredients to make your marriage work as they are now, coming from your background?
Yeah. Oh, I think it's back to intent, really, right? To bring the word intent full circle. But it's about knowing that that person really cares for you. And it's very difficult to be vulnerable when you've been mistreated and manipulated and emotionally abused. And it's scary as
Sure.
hell to become vulnerable. But the way I see it is like I would rather go down in flames and have everything just burn down, and at least I tried, but to keep a wall up because I don't want to get hurt. Or okay, what if he, like, I always take it to the worst case scenario. Okay, so what if he does leave? What if he does abandon me? Okay, well, I also survived my entire family leaving. I'm gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. But I would hate to live with regrets of what if I didn't trust him. So I think opening yourself up. I love the black and white comment because I was very black and white, very, very black and white. And there's gray, there's gray. And I think that opening yourself up, trusting that knowing that the other person loves you. And listen, we are so keen and aware, so keenly aware to manipulation, and toxicity. We can see it. And if you're with someone that loves you, like, give them a break, like, yeah, you're going to fight. Nobody's perfect, but be vulnerable, give them a little bit of a break. And I know for me, it was so hard to say sorry. I never said sorry to my ex-husband, but then you do. And it's like, oh, oh, well, that wasn't so bad, and it's received on the other end. But again, it's like, you have to find that healthy relationship. You have to find that healthy person that you can be vulnerable with, and just see each person as a new slate. Like, I just always was like, well, I'm not going to walk through life and be like, I have daddy issues and everyone's bad and everyone's a narcissist. It's like, you just have to be like, clean slate. You get a clean slate until you show me otherwise.
Right. And that goes back to the stages too. I think in the very beginning, it is a little more black and white for people, and as it should be to an extent,
Yeah.
because they got to get out of their situation, and they have to see it
Yeah.
that way to keep moving forward. But
Yeah.
as you go and move forward more, then the black and white turns a little more into gray,
Yeah.
and you have a little balance with it. The pendulum can swing back to the middle, and
Yeah.
you realize, okay, like, this person has a defect that might not be a full-blown MPD thing, but it's something that I can work with. It's something that, and that's the other part of the flex I talk about too, which is, it's one thing being independent and how to respect yourself and not be a people pleaser.
Yes.
But the next thing after that would be, how much love, affection, and warmth can you give without losing yourself?
Yeah.
Because that's what it's all about. When it's all said and done, we want that. We want to give that love and receive love too. That's in a healthy relationship. I don't know what else somebody would want with it, but it's not about just being alone. I think being alone is a healthy component to be able to have a healthy relationship.
I totally agree. Totally agree.
And then, though, you want to get to that next part. And I don't know if you know James Sexton, the divorce lawyer, but you should check him out. He was on Lex Friedman, and he was on Soft White Underbelly. He's better than a lot of marriage counselors, I think. But he says one of the powerful questions to ask in a relationship is, what does your partner do to make you feel loved? When do you feel loved by your partner? What's your answer to that question?
Well, it's interesting. I love the book, The 5 Languages of Love. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So for me, my love language is physical touch. And at the beginning, my husband and I took this quiz together. And my husband always wants to show me love with words. And I'm like, words mean nothing to me. They mean nothing. Words were misused. I was abused with words, broken promises. They don't mean anything. And it took him years. I'm like, you don't understand. One kiss, one hug, I'm good. I know you love me. But don't, even when he says, well, I'm not going to leave. I'm never going to leave. I'm like, I don't believe you. Like that. I feel like I'm interested in learning more about Sexton because I totally am all here for the love languages. So like, you may think you're loving your partner, but again, intent, how are they receiving it? How do they receive love?
Right. And that's why it's just important to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And hopefully they have the awareness where they know. But I'm like you, I'd be more about the physical, the words that doesn't land, but something about the physical touch part that lands much more for me as well. But you have that conversation, and and I think another thing that helps me with that, if you read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about emotional deposits and emotional
Yes.
withdrawals.
Correct.
You
Right.
want to give as many emotional deposits as you can,
Yes.
while like taking as few emotional withdrawals as you can.
Right.
And a simple concept, but it is true.
Yeah.
And when you have a narcissistic or a borderline parent, there's tons of emotional withdrawals over time, and it just becomes depleted, like your account is bankrupt.
Yeah.
And that's when also probably a good time to go no contact. If you're so emotionally bankrupt with the person, there's no use at that point.
Right.
But that's how I see that side. We're just having the conversation. And sometimes you have to pay attention to what they respond to as well. Like maybe someone isn't able, they think they're one, but maybe they really are another. You don't know. It just depends.
Exactly. And I feel like, yeah, like you said, it's getting to know people and fighting for the person. I feel like, from us who come from a toxic family, it's like nobody fought for us. They gave up so quickly, so at the beginning of a relationship, it's like, no, I'm here. I want to get to know you. Tell me everything. Developing and establishing that trust and conversation is so important.
So I think what a lot of people struggle with, especially when they've had that kind of upbringing, is healthy dating in general. It's like, how do they distinguish between, okay, is this guy just going to be somebody that's I'm going to get in a trauma bond with? And this same applies for men too. But like my thoughts on that matter would be like with James Sexton, he does what I think is pretty rare, where he's able to be a masculine man and have confidence and be more of a leader, but also, and this is the key, this is the part you don't see as much in this kind of person, but then he's also able to like love fully and like own all of his emotions and like go all out with it. That's the part that's impressive to me, because you don't see that as much from men in the public space that are also confident and leaders too.
Correct.
Like, the emotional men, but that are missing that stronger component of it. But to have them fused, that's like a Gomez from the Addams Family, or someone along those lines, where they're in it. Like you can tell they're masculine, but they want to love fully and they want to love completely. And I think, why not try to be that way as a man? And I don't know, how did you try to do this as a woman? What were your thoughts?
It's a great question. It's funny. I've always been the kind where, like, I'm an independent woman. I've had to be independent. I've had to work, and we were on food stamps for a while. And through my divorce, and we joke that we had one knife in the house. Like I've done it. But when it comes to relationships, I'm very old school. Like I remember one of my pastors in the past he was like, anything with two heads, it's not normal. Like you got to have order. And so I'm a very independent, all like women's rights, and so for that. But when it comes to my relationship with my husband, like I feel like, and the word submissive is so archaic, but I feel like there has to be, in that there's a book called Love and Respect, where, the men desire respect, the women desire love. And it's hard, because if you have someone who shows up to the relationship, and like in my case, where I was completely broken, completely void, I didn't know what respect was, I didn't know what love was. And I'm just showing up to my first marriage, like, like totally numb. I didn't have any idea what I was doing. So I feel like there has to be a good balance, and I also, this is the advice I give to my daughter and to my friends, like, just don't be that girl who's like, oh, well, you're just like every other man. Like, no.
Oh, there's a lot of that going on now.
You know what I mean? Like, no, like give him a shot. If he blows it, then he blows it. Right. Move on. But, try to like take everybody for face value. And one of my friends just recently got divorced, and he was a narcissist. And she was like, I'm just so scared. Like, I'm going to pick a narcissist again. I'm like, no, you've seen it. Like, you don't do that twice typically. You know what I mean? Like,
There's
Once your
guardrails.
your eyes are open. Like, trust yourself, you know?
There's just guardrails that I think people can put up for themselves that unless they're a great, great actor and they're like a really good covert one, like the basics are like just take a look at how they disagree. How do they listen to boundaries? How
Yeah,
do they listen to the word no? How
yeah,
do they treat people that can do
yeah,
nothing for them or when no one's looking? Like there's
yep,
little things. If you
yep,
pay attention to that,
yep.
you'll see what's going
Right,
on. But
right.
all too often what I see is people know it, but then they just don't do something about it. Like they
Yeah,
see the red flags, but
yeah,
then they don't act on the red flags or get to the bottom of the red flags.
yeah.
And when you do that, you get what you get to an extent when you do it that way. If you see it and don't take action, I mean, it's just as bad as not even seeing it at all at
Yeah,
that point. Like seeing the red flags is good if you act on seeing the red
right.
flags, which I
One of
think
my
is important.
one of my favorite quotes is when someone, I think it was oh, the name is evading me, but when someone who shows you who they are, believe it the first time, not
Yeah.
the second time, not the third time, not the fourth time. Like, believe it, because it's going to be harder down the road to be like, oh yeah, no, you really turned out to be a not so nice of a person. No, just
Right,
believe
right.
it, because they'll show you if you're paying attention. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about, independence. I think it's so good for people to take time by yourself, live by yourself, because it can be so scary, but also so empowering. And then you can really look at people with a keen eye, and you're not, I want to say dependent, but you know that you'll be okay if you're alone or if this doesn't work out. Like, you can really have your standards high because you're, and that was the other weird thing about my mother. She would always say to me, "Oh, you don't need a man. You don't need a man. Like, you're independent." You da da da. And I'm like,
Mm,
well, I want a relationship though. Like, what's so bad about that? Like,
right.
I want
And
that. Some people
is it
don't,
because
you
she
know?
didn't have a man at the time too, so she didn't want you to
Yeah.
have one either?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, that
Because
does sound about right. Yeah.
a man would take you from her
Right.
in that kind of dynamic. And here's another interesting question for you. And I'll tell you why I'm going to ask the question first before I ask it. But I think it's important for people to be able to see the growth in other people from like a point A
Yeah.
and whatever those like shortcomings looked like
Mhm.
to point B, where they can be in a healthy relationship and things are better. So
Mhm.
the question is, your ex-husband that you've referenced a couple times,
Mhm.
what would he say about you? Like, how would he describe you?
He doesn't like me. He doesn't like me. Um, I was always too fiery for him. And that's how I knew my husband was my man, because I think, like, we were together, I think we were married for like a month, and we had a scuffle with the neighbor, and I came in like, "Oh yeah, like F them," and my husband's like, "Yeah," and I'm like,
Classic.
"What?" I was like, "You didn't tell me to settle down? You didn't what?" I was like, "What?" I
Now
got so
that's a man on your
emotional.
team.
Yeah, like, that's how I knew he loved me. Yeah, I think I'm a little too much for him, and I always try to dim my light, and I have standards. I have very high standards. I don't like bullshit. I want to communicate. I want to be very clear. I communicate, I listen, I will change. And yeah, it's kind of, we're at kind of an odd time right now, because yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother episode, but yeah, I think he would do the right thing and say, "Oh yeah, she's a great mom, she's a great person," but no, I think he's afraid of me, and nobody wants to be in a relationship like that. He's afraid
Afraid
of
of you.
yeah, like
Big emotions. He's afraid of big emotions, maybe.
yes, because he is like you were saying, just borderline apathetic, like really just
Mm.
doesn't let anything phase him, doesn't show any we never fought. 16 years of marriage, we never fought, we never had any passion, like, just that's just, who he is, and I'm just not like that. Like, if I'm not like, "Rah!" then there's a problem. If I'm not fighting for you. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, not the unhealthy, caustic confrontation, but that bothered me. Let's talk about it. Like that.
Right. Okay. I think if people are keeping it real with themselves, there's going to be some disagreements. There's going to be like some passionate clashes.
Yeah.
And the only time that's not true is if someone's just so like passive, like you said, where they just let it go. They let things go, let the other person have their way completely. Outside of a situation like that, there's going to be some clash. There's going to be some emotion. And I think that's another cool thing to talk about too. Letting the passion out and being emotional without it being a toxic emotional roller coaster.
Right.
I think that's the tightrope that a lot of people want to walk.
Right.
And it's like they say, can you have the sex of a positive or of a toxic relationship in a positive one type thing?
Right.
Like that kind of dynamic where I think that's one of the fears I think people run into. They miss the emotional roller coaster. They miss the highs and lows and toxic sex, etc.
Oh, for sure. And it's like that can be so toxic because then when things are peaceful, I remember thinking, I need to cause some chaos right now. Like that, peaceful. I need to start a fight. I need to burn something down right now,
And so that probably stems from a place of wanting to feel that man's love in that case. Like you wanted to feel that he cares.
Yeah.
And maybe he wasn't doing it. Or it could have been your side of it too. And that's the thing in a relationship, it could be either, right? It can be a little you, it can be a little them, it can be a combination of both.
Yeah.
It just depends. It depends on where you are in life at the time.
Yeah.
And from what you were saying before, another interesting thing, you said you knew your husband was the one because when you were like really fiery about what happened outside, that he had your back and was on your team.
Yeah.
It's so funny you said that because I was thinking about that today. If you're with somebody, man or woman, or have a good friend, how much would you be willing to back them up, even if you knew they were in the wrong? Like where would be the line for somebody where, okay, I know my friend messed up, but he's my friend. So it comes down to like what's your priority principle? Is it like to defending just truth? Or is it that you have your friends back? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I just think it's interesting to see how people's thought process would be. And some of it would depend on what they did wrong, probably too.
Right.
Like, too far is too far. But there's probably other medium cases of like, okay, my friend messed up here, but he's my friend or she's my friend. I have his back. I'm going to have his back or her back when no one else does because that's what I do for my friends. Now,
see, I feel like I seek truth in literally everything. I tell the truth to a fault. I teach my kids that. And I feel like there's a difference between defending someone blindly and not caring enough to have a conversation that went, you probably need permission to speak freely. Like maybe you could have handled that a little bit differently because if you're their friend, like that's just how I am. Like I wouldn't want enablers around me who are like, yeah, you're fine. Like you can totally act like that all the time and you're fine. Like, no, if that's one thing, like I felt so out of control in my first marriage because nobody was reining me in. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Like
you need containment. Containment is what they call that.
What?
Teal Swan, I'm not sure if you know who that is, but she has a expression called containment. And they said that there's a thing called positive containment where women, they feel safe around men that show some amount of positive concern for them. And she said what happens to some women is only the dark triad narcissistic guys, because they're controlling, it mimics that of a positive containment. And then the guys that are maybe like your ex or someone else who are more passive, they don't give women that any containment. They don't give them any of that positive concern. So the woman doesn't feel loved. They feel like they're free. They're too free though. Like they want to feel like this other guy is concerned for me. And she calls it positive ownership. And I know there's a terrible connotation with the word ownership, but she says positive ownership is when you can't hurt someone else without also hurting yourself. So it's like if you're a man, you want to have positive ownership with your woman. You want to make sure that nothing bad happens to her, because something were to happen to her that's bad, it would also hurt you.
Yeah.
But to do that not in a controlling way,
Right.
but in a loving way.
Such a fine line.
Oh, it's very fine line. Very fine line.
And with friends and kids, I feel like it comes down to, is it beneficial for them? You know, I mean, hard conversations are hard conversations. And while I will support anyone I love, if you're going to ask me my opinion and I think you were in the wrong, I'm going to tell you. I would hope the same for me. You know, if someone was saying you really messed up, like I would want to know.
Well, here's the pin, though. So I would say I agree with you. I think what you can do is you can talk to that person individually. Yeah, say this is what I really think. But to the public, maybe like have their back in public, perhaps. We're like, okay,
Oh
something
my
like that.
gosh. Yes. I feel like I play that card a lot with my kids.
There you go.
Like, oh, they will know, like, I have your back. But then, like, behind the scenes, I'm like, bro, why'd you do that? You know what I mean? But
And
like,
that's awesome, though. Like that's how you like if they can do that to you and not humiliate you in public. Like you can have that conversation behind closed doors. And that's another thing that guy James Sexton talks about. He goes, make a rule. You don't talk trash about your partner to other people. If you need to talk trash, you talk directly to them. Like,
right.
talk to them about whatever's going on.
Right.
But talk up your partner to other people. And some people misconstrued that though too. They said, oh well, that could be controlling where you don't want that your person to call you out. But it's like, no. It's only in public that you'd want to have the unified front. Behind closed doors, you can have whatever conversations you need to have. But to the public, I think that's awesome. Like to me, that would show that someone really cared and loved about me.
Yeah.
If like, especially if they came back at home and told me, oh, actually, I disagree with you about this, but I just wanted to have your back in front of everybody. To me, that would be so powerful and so loving that they did that. They put what they really thought to the side to care about you and show like their loyalty to you, to everybody else, but they're still going to talk to you for real behind closed doors. I think that's the distinction to me.
Huge. I agree with you. That's huge.
So I think everyone should. I don't understand why more people don't try to do that. It's like, why be with a partner that you wouldn't want to talk up in public anyway? Like, if
I don't know. I feel like there's a slippery slope of people think it's cool to badmouth their kids. People think it's cool to gossip. People think it's cool to badmouth their partner. And I don't know. I feel like
it's weak energy. That's a low vibration. I call that gossipy thing.
Yeah.
It's more of a lower vibration. And again, anyone can fall prey to it sometimes.
Oh, for sure.
If you notice it, it's like, like there's a book I read before. It's like, don't talk about anyone behind their back unless you're talking good about them. It's like, I think that's generally a good rule, unless someone can be harmed. That's the caveat to that.
Right.
If someone can be harmed by you not speaking up,
just
speak up.
For sure.
Besides something like that,
absolutely, I agree.
It is what it is with that. But as we wrap this up here, is there any other kind of closing thoughts or anything else that was coming to your mind that you didn't get a chance to say, perhaps?
Oh gosh, you're fantastic. We were all over the place in this.
No plan. Clearly, no plan. We're free balling over here.
It was great. No, to anyone out, I would say my message always is to anyone out there who feels trapped, who is no contact, who feels alone. It gets better. You're not alone. You're not a villain for walking away from your narcissistic parent. And it's going to be okay. I've been in the pits, the pits of the pits, not knowing, not having anyone. And it's going to be okay. You'll find your people. Even if you're alone right now, you'll find your people. Right. And just keep walking, keep preserving your peace, keep focusing on your health day by day, breath by breath, and everything is going to be okay. You're not going to be punished because you don't have a relationship with your family. You're going to be okay. That's the biggest thing that I'd want everyone to know.
Which brings me to one more. This is the last question. So, do you have a guideline for people on when you think like for a checklist for them for when they should go no contact? I know no two situations will be exactly the same, but do you have any kind of guideline and say like, okay, if once this, and this happens for you, like, and whatever that is for you, maybe that's when to cut it off?
I would really send everyone back to their inner voice, back to their journey, back to their story, back to their past. Write everything down that happened, embrace everything that happened. And I think everybody's story is so different. And, you know, when we come from a toxic family, we have been told that we can't trust ourselves, that we can't trust our choices, that we shouldn't believe ourselves, that we need to depend on our parents and believe our parents. And I would just say to sit alone with yourself, and I wouldn't listen to anyone. I would just listen to yourself. And, you know, also you don't have to have all the answers. You know, when I went no contact with my mom, it wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm never, I said to myself, you'll never do this to me again. But every day you take it day by day, and you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have it figured out. You don't, oh, what are you going to say to Aunt Jane? Like, you don't have to have that figured out. You know, you don't have to have a particular checklist of, well, if this happens, I'm going to cut them off. You know, all I can tell you is that you will know in your soul when you have had enough. You've been broken enough. You've been discarded enough. You've been abused enough. You see it affecting the people you love. You know when you've had enough, and trust yourself. Don't listen to anybody else. Trust yourself.
That's the best way to say it. I love that. Trust yourself, your internal voice. It will not, and your gut will not steer you the wrong way, I would say.
No. We were told our whole lives it would.
Right.
But it doesn't.
When we learn to listen to that, that's a huge empowering step. And learning to trust that voice as opposed to what whomever the toxic people in our lives were that were telling us to not trust it and to second guess yourself and all that good stuff.
And you don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't owe anyone in the family. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't even have to talk to the person or the family member that you're going no contact with. Like, be empowered and emboldened in your choice. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You are an adult. You are choosing your peace. That's it. Feel free to block, and that's my favorite thing. I couldn't just get out of here.
And I'm glad you mentioned that part too, because some people do try to weaponize that. Oh, you need to have a big discussion with them before you do it. And it's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. If anything, they're just going to try to talk you out of it, and it'll turn into a debate. And it's not a debate.
More crazy making. Yeah.
Absolutely crazy making.
And again, it's back like, oh, you shouldn't. Oh, well, you keep the door open. No. Like, why do we have to be nice? We don't have to be nice. Don't be nice. You know, don't call them up and curse them out, but like, don't be nice. Block them, block their number, block them on social media. Don't talk to them. Like, that's okay not to be nice. You've been through enough, you know? And there's
nice
this
to yourself
mentality. Oh, you have to be nice. No, you don't. You don't have to be nice.
I say be nice to yourself is what I would make sure people do.
Yeah.
But Terri, where can people find you out there?
So you could go to characteroutspodcast.com. I've got a bunch of resources, ways to get in touch with me. Or find me over at the Snark and the Fun on Instagram. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify or Apple, or pretty much wherever you listen to your podcasts. Yeah, that's it.
All right. I love chatting with you, Terri. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.